She wouldn't eat. He said it was nothing. Then one night, she told me the truth, and I made a call right away. The detective's name was Johnson. He had 17 years on the force, a coffee stain on his left cuff he hadn't noticed yet, and the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything a long time ago. He sat in my living room at 1:52 in the morning, and he looked at me the way you look at someone who just stepped off a ledge and somehow, impossibly, landed on their feet. "If she hadn't told you," he said quietly, "you'd have been dead by Christmas." I didn't cry. I should have. I just kept thinking about the cookies. 2 hours I'd spent on those cookies. Chocolate chip, slightly underdone in the center the way Emma liked them, or the way I thought she liked them. I'd shaped them into little stars because she'd mentioned once that stars were her favorite shape. I'd cooled them on the rack, arranged them on her pink plate with the bunny in the center, and brought them to her like an offering. She'd looked at them with those enormous blue eyes, and her whole body had gone rigid, like I was pointing a gun at her, not a cookie. I thought I was failing as a stepmother. I thought she just didn't like me. I had no idea she was trying to save my life. Let me go back. Because this story doesn't start with a detective in my living room at 2 in the morning. It starts 18 months earlier, with a dating app, a man with a photograph that didn't look like a dating app photograph, and a voice on the first phone call that made me sit down because I wasn't sure my legs were going to hold. I was 34. I'd been divorced once, amicably, mercifully, and I'd spent 3 years rebuilding something resembling a stable life in a 2-bedroom rental in Tacoma, Washington. I had a job I liked, friends I loved, a routine that wasn't glamorous but was mine. I was not by any clinical measure looking for anything serious. And then Michael Hartley messaged me on a Thursday evening in February, and every carefully constructed wall I'd built in 3 years dissolved in about 6 weeks. He was 41, divorced, regional sales manager for a mid-size pharmaceutical distribution company called Viridian Health, the kind of job that involved a lot of travel, a company car, and a comfortable salary he wore lightly, the way people do when they've had money long enough that it stopped meaning anything. He had dark hair going silver at the temples, a smile that arrived slightly before the rest of his face, and a daughter named Emma who was 4 years old when I met her, and the most heartbreaking, beautiful child I'd ever seen. Emma's mother, Michael's first wife, was named Jennifer. She'd died 14 months before I met him. A sudden illness, he said. Organ failure. The doctors had never been entirely clear on the cause, he said, and he said it with a grief so practiced and precise that I never once thought to question it. His eyes went somewhere else when he talked about her. His jaw tightened. It was the face of a man still carrying something heavy, and my heart, foolishly, went out to him. We were married 11 months after we met. Emma was my flower girl. She wore a white dress with a yellow sash and carried her stuffed rabbit, she called him Bun, down the aisle like he was the ring bearer. I have the photograph on my phone. Her face is serious, focused, beautiful. She did not look afraid yet. That came later. The food thing started about 3 weeks after we moved into Michael's house. A 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet neighborhood in Gig Harbor. A 40-minute drive from downtown Tacoma. Big yard, good school district. Exactly the kind of house that is supposed to mean something. I'd made pancakes the first morning. Buttermilk. Because Emma had said pancakes, with the kind of reverence that told me it was a significant food. I cut them into triangles, added a face in blueberries, and brought them to her at the kitchen table feeling, I'll admit, slightly proud of myself. She looked at the plate. Her hands, resting on the table, started to tremble. Not dramatically, barely visibly. Just a fine, barely perceptible tremor, like a wire with too much current running through it. She stared at the pancakes with those big blue eyes, and she did not eat them. She's still adjusting, Michael said from behind his phone. Leave it. So I left it. I told myself it was normal. New house, new routine, grief she was still processing. She was 4. She was allowed to have complicated feelings about food. I moved on. But she didn't eat the pasta at dinner. She didn't eat the grilled cheese the next morning. She didn't eat the scrambled eggs, the chicken strips, the apple slices cut into fans the way I'd read online that kids found appealing. She would sit at the table politely and watch the food and not eat. And when the meal was over, she would carry her plate to the counter and say, "Thank you, Rachel," in a small formal voice and disappear back to her room. I spent 90 minutes once making homemade mac and cheese from scratch. She looked at it like it might detonate. Every time I mentioned it to Michael, he had a different explanation ready. She was grieving. She was testing boundaries. She was adjusting to me. She was going through a phase. His voice was always calm, always certain, always faintly dismissive, not unkindly, but with the confidence of a man who has decided he understands a situation better than you do, and no further input is required. She'll eat when she's hungry, he told me, when I showed him the numbers from her pediatric checkup. She'd dropped 4 pounds in 6 weeks. On a child that size, 4 pounds is not a number you set aside. Michael, she's fine, Rachel. He closed his laptop. Stop catastrophizing. I went back to the kitchen and stood very still for a moment with my hands on the counter, breathing. I told myself he knew his daughter. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I told myself this was a blended family, this was hard, this was going to take time. I told myself a lot of things that were not true. The daycare called on a Tuesday in November. Ms. Patricia Alves, who had been running the center for 11 years, and did not call parents unless something was actually wrong. Emma's been throwing her lunch away, she told me. Every day, unopened. I watch her do it. She goes straight to the trash when she thinks nobody's looking. And I'm concerned, Mrs. Hartley, because I can see her ribs now when she lifts her arms. I've been in childcare for over a decade, and that's not a sentence I say often. My stomach dropped somewhere past the floor. How long has this been happening? I asked. Since September, she said. I should have called sooner. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I called Michael. He was in a sales meeting in Bellevue. He texted back 15 minutes later. Behavioral. Kids do this. Don't panic. I sat in the parking lot of a Walgreens and looked at that text for a long time. His own daughter's ribs were showing, and he texted me, don't panic. Something shifted, very quietly, somewhere inside me. Not alarm, not yet, but a door I hadn't noticed before was beginning very slowly to open. I just didn't know yet what was on the other side of it. I made an appointment with a pediatrician, Dr. Sonia Mehta, who had graduated from UW School of Medicine and had, according to her profile, a specialty in childhood nutrition and anxiety disorders. I brought Emma in without telling Michael. I told myself it was because he'd make it a fight. That was partly true. The other part was that something in me was starting to not trust him with information about his own daughter's health, and I didn't yet have language for why. Dr. Mehta examined Emma thoroughly. Emma was cooperative, quiet, serious. She always seemed more like a small adult than a 5-year-old, like she'd had childhood burned out of her early. When Dr. Mehta asked if her tummy hurt when she ate, Emma looked at her hands and said, no. When Dr. Mehta asked if there was any food she liked, Emma said quietly, outside food. Outside food? Dr. Mehta asked. Food from outside, Emma said, and looked at the wall. Dr. Mehta looked at me over Emma's head with an expression I didn't fully decode in the moment. I decoded it later. Later in the parking lot, sitting in my Honda CR-V with the engine off, I thought about the way Dr. Mehta had written something in her file and drawn a small circle around it, and how she'd handed me her personal number before we left and said, call me anytime. I mean that literally. Anytime. I drove home. I didn't tell Michael we'd gone. That night I lay awake at 3 a.m. and thought about the phrase outside food. Thought about it until it became a shape I could almost hold. Michael left for a pharmaceutical conference in Portland on a Wednesday morning in early December. He kissed me on the cheek, ruffled Emma's hair. Emma went very still when he touched her, like prey, and drove away in his Audi at 7:14 a.m. I watched his car until I couldn't see it anymore, and then I heard Emma exhale. It was the most significant sound I'd ever heard, long and slow and shaking, like she'd been holding it since September. I turned around. She was standing in the hallway in her pajamas, clutching Bun against her chest, and her shoulders had dropped 3 inches from where they usually live. The ghost in her eyes, that flat, removed, terrified quality that I'd come to think of as just her face, flickered, and underneath it, for 1 second, was a little girl. Can we go to the park? She asked. We went to the park. Point Defiance, where there's a pond and ducks and enough open sky that you can breathe. I packed sandwiches, turkey and cheddar, nothing elaborate. We sat on a bench and she ate the entire sandwich in 60 seconds with ketchup on her chin and crumbs on her jacket, smiling, actually smiling, at a duck that was demanding bread with truly unreasonable confidence. I cried behind my sunglasses. My hands were steady, barely. Same food I'd been making for 2 months. Different location, different child. That night, back in the house, I set pasta on the table. Emma sat down. She looked at it. Her shoulders went back up to their usual position, right next to her ears. She pushed the plate away and went the color of old paper. Same child, same pasta, completely different reaction. I sat across from her and looked at her, and something crystallized in my chest so fast it hurt. Not fear, not confusion, clarity. Emma, I said very carefully, can I ask you something? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. She looked at me, those huge eyes. Are you scared of the food, or are you scared of something else? She looked at the table. Her small fingers traced a pattern on the wood that didn't mean anything. I'm not hungry, she said, and went to bed. I did not sleep. 1:09 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake checking my phone, the way you do when your body is too alert for your mind to justify the alertness. The bedroom door creaked open. My heart stopped, then started again. Emma stood in the doorway in her dinosaur pajamas, Bun crushed against her chest with both arms, his seams visibly straining. She was shaking, not just her hands, all of her. A fine, full-body tremor that looked like a child standing in cold wind, except the house was warm. She crossed the room in 4 steps, climbed onto the bed without asking, pressed her lips directly to my ear. I can only talk, she breathed, when Daddy isn't watching. My blood didn't run cold. It stopped, completely, like someone had just pressed a pause button somewhere in my chest. I wrapped her in the duvet, both arms all the way around. She was so small, I could feel every rib. Daddy's in Portland, baby, I said, and my voice was steadier than it had any right to be. He can't hear us. Tell me everything. She took a breath. It sounded like it hurt. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, this 5-year-old child took my entire world and quietly destroyed it. The previous mama stopped eating too, she said, before she got sick. Daddy got angry at her, about money, about a lot of things. And then he started making all her food. He said he was helping. He said she needed help. He put white powder in her bowls, in her drinks. He said it was medicine, special medicine just for her. But she got so sleepy she couldn't walk to the bathroom by herself, and then she died. The room was not moving. I was the one moving. Or nothing was moving, and the world had just become a different shape. Baby, I said. What kind of powder? White, she said. Very small. He stirred it so it disappeared. He watched her eat until it was gone. She paused. He does that with your food too. Sometimes, when you're not looking. He goes to his study, and then he puts something in from a little bag. I did not scream. I did not move. I kept both arms around this child, and I kept my breathing measured, and even because she needed me to not fall apart. Why did you stop eating? I asked, though I already knew. If I eat what he makes, works, she said, with the terrible logic of a 5-year-old who has thought about this for months. Then he knows it's safe, and then he'll do it to you too. She pressed Bun harder against her chest. I didn't want you to get the sleepy sickness. She had been starving herself for months to protect me. This child had watched her mother die, assembled every piece of the truth with her tiny, terrified brain, and decided the only tool she had was her own hunger. If Daddy finds out I told, she whispered, he'll make us both eat the powder. He's not going to find out, I said, and he's not going to make either of us eat anything. I meant it with everything I had. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hands were shaking badly enough that I misdialed twice. Third time. 911. 2 officers arrived first at 1:47 a.m. Then 40 minutes later, 2 detectives. Detective Aaron Johnson, 17 years with Pierce County Sheriff, the one who would later give me the December sentence, and his partner, Detective Lena Vasquez, who had previously worked 8 years on a joint task force for domestic violence and homicide and who sat with Emma in the kitchen with a cup of warm milk and spoke to her in a voice so gentle it barely qualified as a sound. Emma talked. She had apparently been waiting a long time to talk. She described the powder. Small, white, odorless, kept in a plastic zip bag in the false panel behind the second drawer of Michael's study desk. She described her mother's final weeks, the increasing confusion, the inability to stand, the way Jennifer had asked for water and then forgotten she'd asked. She described the way Michael had stood in doorways and watched, and how his expression while watching had been the thing that scared her most. Not grief, not worry, patience. It had looked like patience. She's describing a sedative-type substance administered in food over a prolonged period, Detective Vasquez told me quietly in the hallway. Possibly fentanyl analog or a muscle relaxant at high doses. Something accessible through pharmaceutical distribution channels that wouldn't present obviously on a standard tox screen if no one was looking for it specifically. She said it clinically, carefully, watching my face. We're going to need a warrant. How fast? I asked. If her account holds up, and I believe it does. Judges in this county move quickly on child welfare calls. We'll have probable cause drawn up in the next 2 hours. He lands at SeaTac tomorrow night at 8, I said. Is that enough time? She held my gaze. We'll make it enough time. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell anyone yet, was that while Emma had been talking to the detectives, I had gone to Michael's study. I knew where he kept his spare key. I'd used it once before to get a phone charger. I used it now for a different reason. I didn't touch anything. I just looked. The false panel was exactly where Emma said it would be. Behind the second drawer, there was a seam that shouldn't have been a seam. I pressed it the way she'd described. 2 fingers, center, upward, and it swung open on a small magnetic hinge. Zip bags, 4 of them, white powder, very fine, and beneath them, a folded piece of paper I almost didn't unfold. I unfolded it. It was an insurance policy, mine, dated 2 weeks after our wedding. The payout figure had 7 digits. I put it back exactly as I'd found it, closed the panel, locked the study, walked back to the living room. I did not throw up, which I considered a significant personal achievement. The warrant was signed at 4:38 a.m. by Judge Patricia Okafor of the Pierce County Superior Court. Detective Johnson showed it to me almost apologetically, as if warrants for your own home require a specific social protocol no one has developed yet. Forensic technicians arrived at 5:15. They were systematic and fast and spoke to each other in shorthand I only half followed. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch under the duvet, still holding Bun, her face finally peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in 4 months. I sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and listened to my house being carefully, professionally dismantled. At 6:02 a.m., Detective Vasquez came and found me. We found the panel, she said. Exactly as Emma described. The substance is being sent to the state lab, but preliminary indicators are consistent with a fentanyl analog, specifically something in the nitazene family. Not included in most standard tox panels unless you're specifically looking. She paused. Michael's work gives him access to pharmaceutical supply chains, including international gray market distributors. We're pulling his purchasing history now. There's more, I said. There's a floor safe. I don't know the combination. Emma mentioned it. She called it the box in the floor under the rug. She said her mother's diary is in there. Detective Vasquez looked at me for a long moment. How did she know about the diary? She found her mother writing in it. Jennifer apparently hid it. Michael apparently found it and took it. Vasquez turned and called something down the hallway. 2 minutes later, I heard the sound of a rug being pulled back in Michael's study. 22 minutes after that, Detective Johnson walked into the kitchen holding a clear evidence bag, and what was inside it changed everything that came after. Jennifer Hartley's diary was small, red, and the handwriting deteriorated visibly across its final pages, starting controlled and neat, becoming loose and slanting, eventually barely legible. The detectives read it with gloves on, and they let me read 2 excerpts later, after they'd been logged and photographed and copied. One line from a page dated 9 months before her death. He stands in the doorway and watches me sleep. His eyes are not worried. I don't know what they are. And from the final page, barely legible, I can't lift my hands above my wrists today. I think Emma knows. She keeps putting herself between me and his food. She is 4 years old, and she is trying to save me, and I cannot save her back. Jennifer had known. She had known, and she hadn't been able to prove it, and she had died anyway. And her 4-year-old daughter had watched it happen and memorized every detail and carried it forward like a torch to pass to the next person in line. To me. She hadn't failed to save Jennifer. She'd saved me instead, the only way she could. Michael called at 9:07 a.m. I was ready for it. Detective Johnson was was sitting across the table from me, listening on speaker, his expression giving nothing away. Michael sounded relaxed, slightly solicitous, the voice of a man who believes he has all the information. "Hey, how are things?" "Tired," I said. "Emma had a rough night. She eat anything?" There it was. First question. Not how is she? Not did she sleep? Did she eat? "A little," I said. "She's doing better." "Good." A pause. "I'll be home by 9. We can have dinner. Make it a thing. I'll pick something up." "Sounds perfect," I said. I ended the call and looked at Detective Johnson. "He's going to bring food home," I said. From outside, Johnson's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "He won't make it that far." He didn't. Michael Hartley walked off the jet bridge at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 8:04 p.m. carrying his rolling bag and his laptop case and that polished, warm, pharmaceutical sales smile. He made it approximately 12 feet before Detective Johnson stepped into his path, badge visible. There was a news crew. I didn't know about the news crew until afterward. Apparently, Detective Vasquez had tipped the crime desk at Como 4 because public accountability matters when evidence is this solid and the suspect is this practiced. The camera caught the whole thing. The 4 officers converging, the badge, the bag dropping from Michael's hand, and the moment his face understood what was happening. The charm evaporated, instantly, completely, like a light switching off. What was left underneath was something else entirely. Feral, cornered, the face of something that has survived a long time by pretending to be something it isn't, and now, for the first time, has nowhere left to pretend. He looked at the camera, and I think he knew in that moment that it was over. All of it. Everything he'd built with such precision and patience, and he couldn't make his face do anything acceptable about that. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Local executive arrested. Gig Harbor woman dead from suspected poisoning." Later that night, they updated it. Pharmaceutical manager charged with murder of first wife, second wife's poisoning allegedly underway. I watched it on my phone in the parking lot of a Gig Harbor Hampton Inn, where Emma and I were staying until the house was cleared. Emma was asleep in the room. She had eaten 2 slices of room service pizza and drunk an entire glass of apple juice and fallen asleep before 9 p.m. with the peaceful, sudden unconsciousness of a child whose body has remembered what safe feels like. I sat in the car and watched the news clip 3 times and then put my phone face down on the passenger seat and breathed. The formal charges came 7 weeks later. The state lab confirmed nitazene compound in the bags from Michael's study, specifically metanitazene, a synthetic opioid roughly 100 times more potent than morphine, available through certain international gray market pharmaceutical channels, and almost entirely absent from standard toxicology panels. Jennifer's body was exhumed. A second autopsy, conducted by the state's forensic pathologist, Dr. Marcus Ellery, found trace metabolite evidence consistent with prolonged low-dose metanitazene administration, consistent specifically with exactly what Emma had described. 2 insurance policies. Jennifer's, which had paid out $1.2 million following her death. Mine, taken out 13 days after our wedding, identical structure, identical payout. Exhibit A through Exhibit R. I know because Michael's defense attorney, a very expensive one from Seattle named Bradford Hale, sent subpoenas that touched my email, my medical records, my grocery receipts, my phone location history. He was looking for anything that could muddy the picture. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. I had not been poisoning anyone. I had been making star-shaped cookies for a child who was too frightened to eat them. Emma testified in a closed session, accompanied by a child forensic interviewer named Dr. Cassandra Wolf, who had a PhD in developmental psychology from UW and 15 years of experience conducting trauma-informed interviews with children. Dr. Wolf told the court afterward that Emma's account was, in her professional assessment, among the most consistent and credible she'd encountered in her career. No coaching, no contamination. Just a 5-year-old girl who had been carrying a terrible truth for a very long time and was finally in a room where she was allowed to put it down. Michael pled not guilty. His attorney argued that the substance found in the study was for personal use. Michael apparently was to have been suffering from a secret chronic pain condition. The insurance policies were presented as coincidence. Jennifer's diary was presented as the paranoid writings of a woman who had been mentally unwell. The jury took 4 hours and 11 minutes to return guilty verdicts on both counts. Murder in the first degree of Jennifer Hartley and attempted murder of Rachel Hartley. First degree, premeditated, both of us. He stood when the verdict was read and his face did nothing. Nothing at all, which was almost worse than if it had done something. That was 14 months ago. Emma lives with Jennifer's sister, Claire, who is warm and quiet and cried when I handed Emma over on a Tuesday afternoon in January, and who texts me photographs sometimes. Emma at a birthday party, Emma at the beach, Emma in a school play dressed as a tree, grinning with all her teeth showing. She eats everything. Claire told me she eats everything. She eats with the enthusiasm of a child making up for lost time. I went back to Tacoma, the 2-bedroom rental, the routine. I went back to therapy because there is no version of this story in which you don't need therapy, and my therapist's name is Dr. Anita Rhodes, and she is patient with me in the way that very good therapists are patient. Like she has all the time in the world and she means it. She told me once that I was processing a very rare kind of grief, the grief of a life that never happened, the marriage that was constructed to end me, the home that was designed to be my last one. But it didn't end, she said. You're here. I'm here because Emma Hartley, 5 years old, decided that she loved me enough to be hungry for 4 months, that she trusted me enough, finally, at 1 a.m. on a December night, to press her lips to my ear and tell me the truth. I think about the cookies sometimes, the star-shaped ones she never ate. I think about the star-shaped mold gathering dust in a box somewhere. I think about what it cost her to sit across from those cookies every single time and not eat them, knowing what she knew, carrying what she carried, choosing every day to protect me the only way she had. She's in first grade now. She got a gold star on her spelling test last month. Claire sent me a picture. She's smiling so big you can count every tooth.